Afghanistan is a nation steeped in history, a land that has seen empires rise and fall for thousands of years. Yet, through all the conquests and invasions, Afghanistan has remained unconquered, earning the infamous title, the Graveyard of Empires. From the armies of Alexander the Great to the British Empire, the Soviets, and the United States, this rugged, mountainous country has defeated the mightiest military powers. But why is this the case? Why has this land of tribal warriors and fierce independence proven so impenetrable to foreign domination? Today, we'll uncover the deep historical roots of Afghanistan's defiance and its complex web of geography, culture, and resistance. Welcome to Infinitia Verity, where we break down the most fascinating mysteries of history, science, and politics. Join us as we unravel the hidden forces shaping our world. If you enjoy learning about powerful historical events that resonate in today's world, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with all our latest content. Now let's dive into Afghanistan's extraordinary history and its reputation as the graveyard of empires. Segment 1. Ancient Roots of Resistance. Afghanistan's reputation for repelling invaders stretches back thousands of years, long before the modern empires even existed. The rugged and mountainous landscape has always been a key factor in the country's defiance. The Hindu Kush Mountains, which form a massive barrier through the heart of Afghanistan, have historically been a nightmare for invading armies. Its valleys and narrow passes, like the famous Khyber Pass, have often served as the stage for ambushes and guerrilla warfare, tactics that would persist throughout its history. One of the first major empires to feel the weight of Afghan resistance was that of Alexander the Great in 330 BCE. Alexander, after defeating the mighty Persian Empire, turned his sights on Afghanistan, then part of Bactria. However, his conquest was anything but easy. The tribes of the region were masters of guerrilla warfare, and Alexander's forces had to deal with constant attacks and hostile terrain. It took Alexander nearly 3 years to subdue the area, a far longer campaign than in other parts of his conquests. To consolidate control, Alexander married Roxana, a local Bactrian princess, hoping to create alliances with local rulers. While Alexander managed to establish some cities, such as Alexandria of the Caucasus, modern-day Bagram, his empire crumbled after his death, and Afghanistan quickly reverted to its independent tribal structure. The Seleucid Empire, which took over much of Alexander's territory, also struggled to maintain control over Afghanistan, signaling the beginning of a long history of foreign powers failing to hold the region for long. Interesting facts. 1. Alexander's marriage to Roxana was as much a diplomatic move as it was personal, aimed at uniting the Macedonians and local Bactrians. 2. After Alexander's death, his generals, the Diadochi, failed to maintain control of Afghanistan, marking one of the first failures of an empire in the region. Segment 2. The Islamic Conquest and the Mongol Devastation. Centuries later, Afghanistan found itself in the crosshairs of the expanding Islamic empires. The Islamic conquests of the 7th century saw the region come under the control of the Rashidun Caliphate, followed by the Umayyads and Abbasids. While Islam spread through the region, the fiercely independent Afghan tribes often rebelled against central authority, whether Islamic or not. Despite becoming an important center of Islamic culture, with cities like Herat and Ghazni flourishing, the Afghan highlands remained difficult to control. The rise of the Ghaznavid Empire in the 10th and 11th centuries saw Afghanistan become a base for further conquests into India. However, this brief moment of empire building did not last, as the region once again fractured into warring tribal factions. But the true devastation came in the 13th century when the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan swept across Central Asia. In 1221, Genghis Khan launched his brutal invasion of Afghanistan, utterly destroying cities like Herat and Balkh. It's estimated that the Mongol invasions killed more than 1 million people in Afghanistan, devastating for a region that had a much smaller population than it does today. Despite the sheer brutality of the Mongol war machine, even they struggled to fully pacify the Afghan tribes. After Genghis's death, the region continued to be a problem for his successors. Interesting facts. 1. The Mongols slaughtered nearly 1.5 million Afghans, half the population at the time, during their campaigns. 2. Even after this devastation, local Afghan tribes managed to retain some autonomy, refusing to be fully incorporated into the Mongol Empire. Segment 3. The British and the Anglo-Afghan Wars. The 19th century marked the beginning of the Great Game, a geopolitical struggle between the British Empire and Russia for influence in Central Asia. Afghanistan, strategically located between British-controlled India and the Russian Empire, became a focal point in this rivalry. In 1839, the British launched the First Anglo-Afghan War in an attempt to install a puppet regime favorable to British interests. Initially, the British had some success. They installed Shah Shuja on the Afghan throne and established garrisons in Kabul. However, the harsh reality of occupying Afghanistan soon became clear. The British found themselves increasingly isolated as Afghan tribal leaders rallied against the foreign invaders. In 1842, the British decided to retreat from Kabul, but their withdrawal turned into one of the most disastrous events in British military history. During the infamous retreat from Kabul, nearly 16,000 British soldiers and civilians were slaughtered by Afghan tribes in the mountains, with only one European survivor, Dr. William Brydon, managing to escape back to British territory. The British would return in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, 1878 to 1880, once again trying to impose their will on the Afghan people. Despite a British victory at the Battle of Kandahar, they were forced to recognize Afghanistan's independence in all but foreign affairs. Interesting facts. 1. The retreat from Kabul in 1842 is often referred to as the greatest disaster in British military history. 2. The British influence over Afghanistan was largely limited to diplomatic control, with real power remaining in the hands of Afghan tribal leaders. In December 1979, Afghanistan once again became the battleground for a major global power. The Soviet Union, fearing the collapse of its client government in Afghanistan, launched an invasion to prop up the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. What followed was a decade-long conflict that would drain Soviet resources, morale, and ultimately contribute to the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The Afghan Mujahideen, Islamic guerrilla fighters, mounted a fierce resistance against the Soviet forces. Backed by foreign powers like the United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, the Mujahideen used Afghanistan's harsh terrain to their advantage, employing hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and sabotage to wear down the Soviet military. Despite deploying over 100,000 troops and massive air support, the Soviets could not maintain control of the countryside. The introduction of Stinger missiles by the United States in the mid-1980s was a game-changer. These shoulder-fired missiles allowed the Mujahideen to shoot down Soviet helicopters and jets, significantly reducing Soviet air superiority. By 1989, the Soviet Union was forced to withdraw its forces in defeat, leaving behind a devastated country. The war cost the Soviets approximately 15,000 soldiers, and the economic burden of the war helped accelerate the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Interesting facts. The CIA's Operation Cyclone was one of the longest and most expensive covert operations, funneling billions of dollars in arms and aid to the Afghan Mujahideen. The Soviet-Afghan War is often seen as a key factor in the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union, much like how Afghanistan contributed to the decline of earlier empires. The U.S. and NATO's occupation in Afghanistan became a lesson in the harsh realities of fighting an entrenched insurgency in one of the world's most difficult terrains. Despite a quick initial victory over the Taliban regime in late 2001, the occupation soon devolved into a protracted conflict. Much like the British and Soviets before them, U.S. forces found it easy to take the cities but impossible to fully control the countryside, where the Taliban and other militant groups had retreated. The war effort was marred by complex issues: internal corruption in the Afghan government, lack of infrastructure, tribal rivalries, and the Taliban's skillful use of asymmetric warfare. Despite massive investments in the Afghan military and attempts to build stable governance structures, the country remained plagued by instability. Between 2001 and 2021, the war claimed the lives of more than 3,500 coalition troops and hundreds of thousands of Afghan civilians. One of the major turning points was the rise of the Taliban in rural areas. Although the U.S. and NATO forces could secure major cities and highways, the Taliban increasingly exercised control over the countryside. Their deep understanding of the terrain and ability to exploit Afghanistan's tribal structures allowed them to regroup and sustain their insurgency. By 2020, with no end to the conflict in sight, the U.S. signed a peace deal with the Taliban, promising the withdrawal of foreign forces. In August 2021, after a rapid and stunning Taliban offensive, the Afghan government collapsed and the Taliban once again took control of Kabul. The U.S. withdrew the last of its troops, ending the longest war in its history, a war that many now see as a replay of previous imperial failures in the country. Interesting facts. The U.S. spent over $2 trillion during its 20-year war in Afghanistan, making it one of the costliest conflicts in American history. Despite the longest NATO military campaign ever, the Taliban controlled more territory by 2021 than it did before 9/11, underlining the limited success of military intervention. One of the most critical reasons Afghanistan has earned its title as the graveyard of empires is its geography. Afghanistan's terrain is a nightmare for invading forces. Over three-quarters of the country is covered by rugged mountains, with the Hindu Kush range acting as a formidable barrier between northern and southern Afghanistan. These mountains contain narrow, easily defensible passes, which local fighters have used for centuries to ambush foreign armies. The Khyber Pass, in particular, has served as the gateway for many historical invasions, including those by the British and the Soviets, only to prove treacherous for their armies. The harsh winters, scarcity of water, and lack of infrastructure make supplying an army incredibly difficult, especially for large, mechanized forces. For centuries, Afghan fighters have also mastered guerrilla warfare, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to attack invading forces and then melt back into the mountains. This combination of topographical obstacles and strategic mastery of the terrain makes it easy for small, mobile Afghan forces to defeat larger, conventional armies, as seen in numerous conflicts. Interesting facts. The Hindu Kush mountain range has peaks reaching over 24,000 feet, making troop movements and supply chains extremely challenging. The legendary Khyber Pass has been the site of numerous battles, including during the British Empire's military campaigns, and remains one of the most strategic passes in the region. Afghanistan's unique tribal structure also plays a significant role in its resistance to foreign control. Afghan society is a mosaic of different ethnic groups, with the Pashtuns being the largest, followed by Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, and others. Each group is divided into tribes and clans, which often have their own loyalties and rivalries. This tribal division has traditionally made it difficult for any foreign power to conquer the whole country, as the tribes are fiercely independent and often prioritize local autonomy over central governance. Pashtunwali, the ancient code of conduct followed by the Pashtun tribes, emphasizes hospitality, revenge, and independence, values that have guided Afghan resistance for centuries. Historically, when foreign forces have tried to impose central authority, Afghan tribes have united, often temporarily, against the invaders, only to return to their rivalries once the foreign threat is gone. During the Soviet invasion, for instance, the Mujahideen comprised different tribal groups, each with its own leader, often united only by their common opposition to the Soviets. The same tribal structure allowed the Taliban to rise to power in the 1990s by exploiting local rivalries and presenting themselves as a unifying force. However, even they struggled to control the entire country due to local resistance in areas like the Panjshir Valley, where Ahmad Shah Massoud led Tajik forces against both the Soviets and the Taliban. Interesting facts. Pashtunwali emphasizes values like Badal, which has historically motivated tribes to wage long-running feuds, even against foreign invaders. The Panjshir Valley remains one of the few places in Afghanistan that was never fully conquered, even by the Soviets or the Taliban, due to its formidable natural defenses and its inhabitants' fierce resistance. After millennia of resisting conquest, Afghanistan today stands as a symbol of the limitations of military power in achieving political goals. The lessons learned from the various invasions, from Alexander the Great to the United States, highlight the challenges of fighting not just a people, but a way of life deeply rooted in the values of independence and local governance. The repeated failures of foreign powers to impose control over Afghanistan have broader implications for modern geopolitics. The Soviet invasion, often referred to as Russia's Vietnam, and the American intervention, which has drawn parallels to the Soviet debacle, both serve as cautionary tales about the dangers of prolonged military engagements in a region that defies conventional strategies. Despite advances in technology, superior firepower, and seemingly endless resources, the most powerful nations have been humbled by Afghanistan's rugged terrain, decentralized society, and relentless fighters. Afghanistan's place as the graveyard of empires is now etched into global consciousness. The country has not only resisted conquest, but has repeatedly contributed to the downfall of major powers. The British Empire, which at its height controlled a quarter of the world's land, was forced to recognize the limits of its influence in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union, a superpower, could not sustain its Afghan campaign, leading to a decline that contributed to its collapse. Most recently, the United States, with the most powerful military in history, withdrew after a 20-year conflict with little to show for it, leaving Afghanistan once again in the hands of the Taliban. Interesting facts. The cost of the U.S. war in Afghanistan is estimated at over $2 trillion, with over 2,400 U.S. military deaths. Following the withdrawal of Soviet forces in 1989, many Soviet veterans came to view the Afghan war as the bleeding wound, reflecting the deep trauma and damage it caused the Soviet military and society. Afghanistan's enduring legacy as the graveyard of empires is a testament to the resilience of its people, the strategic challenges posed by its geography, and the complexities of its tribal and cultural landscape. Throughout history, many have tried to conquer this land, but none have fully succeeded. From Alexander the Great to the British Empire, the Soviets, and the United States, Afghanistan has resisted and outlasted them all. What does this history teach us? It shows that military might alone cannot overcome a deeply rooted culture of independence and resistance. Afghanistan's story is not just about war and conquest. It's about the unyielding spirit of its people and their determination to remain free from foreign control. Thank you for watching Infinitia Verity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Afghanistan's remarkable history, make sure to like this video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe for more fascinating content. What other historical mysteries would you like us to cover? Let us know in the comments below.